Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. The teachings of Luang Por Chah that I was talking about earlier today, his simile of still flowing water, that strange kind of paradox. How can water both be still and flowing simultaneously? And he's pointing out that this is what the mind, this is the nature of the mind, is very much like this, that the quality of knowing, of awareness is perfectly still, is not related to time or place, space, like still water, and then flowing, and so far as perceptions and thoughts and feelings, moods, flow through. They come, they go, they change incessantly, unrelentingly. And so he used this analogy of the mind as being like still flowing water, having both these qualities present together. So those teachings are, I'm sure he gave them for a variety of different reasons, but one of the things, one of the elements of our experience that teaching aims very directly at is what in Buddhist jargon we call becoming, bhava in Pali. And I remember when I first went to the monastery in Thailand, I'd never actually studied Buddhism, never practiced meditation really before, and never even opened a Buddhist book before I got there. So it was one of those, there's a whole variety of different terms that it took me ages to figure out or have any sort of sense of what was being talked about. I kept thinking, becoming, well, becoming what? And what's becoming what? What's it changing from what into what? And but everyone seemed to be using it all the time. And it was one of those things that everyone else seems to understand it. How come I'm missing it? What does this mean? But like many Buddhist terms, there isn't really an English word that quite matches the meaning that's carried, that's conveyed by the Pali or the Sanskrit. So becoming, the word bhava, it's really that. It's an experience that we're all very familiar with. I'm probably not presuming too much to say that, because it's that feeling that the thing over there, that is a little bit more interesting than this. It's leaning into the moment, leaning into the future, leaning into the promise of the next moment, or the next thing. That this is kind of ordinary because we've been with this for a while, but that, what's that over there? That looks promising. Wonder what that will bring. So this is a quality that finds its way into endless numbers of corners of our lives, doesn't it? That sense of anticipation or wanting to get onto the next thing, that sense of interest in novelty, and a kind of boredom or a kind of indifference towards what is present. This is normal. This is ordinary. Therefore, it can't be really that interesting. But that, well, that's new. Therefore, it's interesting. It attracts our attention. So this quality of becoming is one of these driving forces in our life that makes us always restless, that the heart is never quite at peace, because there's always that promise of something a little bit better just over there, or in the next moment. There was a cartoon that I saw pinned up on the notice board in the hallway of the Buddhist Society many years ago, and it was one of those rare cartoons that was of the inside of a Buddhist monastery. You don't get well, maybe in Buddhist magazines you get them. And they had these two shaven-headed, robed characters sitting on a bench beside each other in this hall, and one had a slightly sort of furrowed brow and an anxious look on his face, and the one next to him was sort of tilted slightly towards him, and the caption was, "Nothing happens next. This is it." Nothing happens next. This is it. So I don't really have to say any more, do I? That feeling of, well, something's got to happen next. What's next? And and because of it seeming so reasonable, we are unaware of the kind of tyranny that habit has over the heart. How much that drives away any kind of experience of real peacefulness or content, because no matter how good this might be, then the more that the habit of becoming is entrenched, then the more it's like, well, that might be a little bit better, and that, always leaning into the next thing, always becoming other. When the Buddha, in his first discourse, the Dhammacakka Sutta, the turning of the wheel of Dhamma, when he described the Four Noble Truths, for each of the Four Noble Truths, he spelled out the key issues involved with them, and some of this we recite in the morning chanting, second part of the morning chanting. So dukkha he described as all the different kinds of ordinary dukkha, like aging, sickness, death, and then these phrases: separation from the liked is dukkha, association with the disliked is dukkha, not getting what you want is dukkha. It covers the whole, pretty much covers the whole map, doesn't it? So this is dukkha. This is things aren't quite the way they should be, or the universe is just a little bit or a lot out of order right now. That feeling of association with the disliked, having to be with what we don't like, or separated from what we do like. Separation from the loved is dukkha. So then he points to the second noble truth is the cause. What is the origin of dukkha? And this is probably all very familiar terrain to us, and we know that. Oh yes, I know that one. And the Buddha pointed to the cause of the ailment. If dukkha is the symptom, then the cause of the malaise is tanha. Literally means thirst, or craving. And then when we think of craving or desire, often the English word desire is used to translate tanha, we tend to immediately associate that with sense desire, the desire for sense pleasure, the wanting something that we like. That's what we tend to think of as a sort of obvious kind of desire or craving. That there's something that I like, I haven't got it, I want it. Kind of obvious, right? They're all very, very familiar terrain. But actually the Buddha described three different kinds of desire. And when he's mapping out tanha, he says that which is always seeking fresh birth, pono bhavika, always seeking fresh delight, now here, now there. Nandiraga sahagata tatra binandini. Ever seeking fresh delight, now here, now there. That sound familiar? That when he named the three different kinds of desire, the first one was Gama Tanha, the desire for sense pleasure, and that's obviously the one that gets most of our attention. It's a sort of sex and violence, banner headlines, attention grabbing kind of desire. But and obviously that also has its own many difficulties and causes great obstructions for us. But particularly for meditation practice, the most difficult kinds of desire are, in some senses, the two little quiet ones in the background. Like you often see a Buddha image. The Buddha is the sort of central figure, and you see Sariputra on one side and Moggallana on the other. These two little sort of figures that you don't really notice. Well, if because the reverse image, you have Kama Tanha, sense desire, in the middle. Then down in the corners you have Bhava Tanha and Vibhava Tanha, the desire to become and the desire to get rid of, the desire to be and the desire to annihilate. And so these are something that is, as people practicing meditation and aiming to develop a spiritual path, these are characters that we really need to get to know and to take a closer look and get acquainted with these qualities, because they so easily dominate our minds and the way that we function in the world. The desire to become, the desire to get rid of, that the heart caught up in that, always trying to get on to the next thing, trying to acquire qualities, trying to get rid of problems. And it can seem so reasonable. And one of the things I like to point out is how, when we look at, say, the qualities of right effort, the Buddha described right effort as one of the factors of the Eightfold Path, Samma Vayamo. And when he defined right effort, there's four different pieces. Technical evening. 4 different pieces. You will not be tested. Well, you will be tested, but not by me. You'll be tested by life. So there's 4 different pieces to right effort. Restraining the unwholesome from arising, and then whatever unwholesome things have arisen, they've snuck past your restraining efforts. Whatever unwholesome things have arisen, then to let go of. So samvara is to restrain, pahana is to let go. And then cultivating the wholesome, bhavana, and then anurakana, to protect the wholesome qualities that have arisen. So, here you have, this is right effort, to cultivate the wholesome, and to keep it, to sustain it, to restrain the unwholesome from arising, or if it has arisen, to let it go, to relinquish it, abandon it. Now that can sound an awful lot like the desire to become and the desire to get rid of. Can't it? They bear a close resemblance to each other. Cultivating wholesome qualities. Well, isn't that becoming? If we're trying to cultivate concentration, trying to cultivate insight, trying to cultivate loving kindness and wisdom, patience, all these noble characteristics, these noble aspects of being. And then letting go, or restraining, letting go. Isn't that somehow, I don't want this around, this shouldn't be here, this, anger and restlessness and impatience and fear and doubt and so forth. Surely if I'm wanting to get rid of that, how can that be? What's the difference between that aspect of right effort and the desire to annihilate, to get rid of? So it's, in a way, a lot of the challenge of meditation practice is learning to recognize the difference of tone, of what are the right ways, or the most helpful ways of making effort, of putting forth our energy and endeavoring to cultivate wholesome qualities without that getting co-opted by the becoming tendency, and without it or being taken up by the desire to get rid of. Now this might sound all a little bit technical, but these are really actually very tangible and practical qualities. And what we find, and hopefully during the coming days and practicing together, it'll become, no pun intended, clearer, or we'll begin to notice how if there's a me involved, if there's a me, an I, a mine, as long as there's a sense of self involved, then you can almost guarantee that that's the trouble. Trouble will ensue. That's the bhavatanha, vibhavatanha, the desire to become, the desire to get rid of. Right effort is, there's the exertion of effort to cultivate the wholesome qualities like concentration and insight. But there's no sense of I or me or mine involved. It's not a personal thing. It's not cast in the role of me getting something, me becoming something, me getting rid of something, me having a problem that I've got to get rid of, and then I will be fine because then I won't have my problem. It's much more, and it might seem a subtle difference or kind of just semantics, but the heart knows the contrast, because in the one way of working, there's no rest. There's a constant sort of burdenedness, a tightness, a heaviness to it. When it's me trying to become concentrated, me trying to become wise, me trying to become the perfect meditator, me trying to do everything right, me trying to be the noble, unselfish, compassionate, kind, loving being, the perfect mother or the perfect teacher or the perfect person. And the contrast between that and just doing the right thing, doing what is appropriate, that doing what's necessary, and noticing, this is a distracted state of mind. Let go of the distraction, and bring the attention back to the present moment. Peacefulness. So I am not involved. The sense of me and mine doesn't have to be involved in that equation. A few months ago, I was at a memorial service in the local town near our monastery in California, in Ukiah. And this was a memorial for a Japanese-American man called Seiji Sugawara. And he had sort of been kind of Mr. Altruism of Mendocino County, our local county. He was on the board of directors of about 15 different charities. Everything from a performing arts space for local teenagers, low-cost housing for migrant farm workers, land protection trusts, incredible array of different things he was involved in. And where I live is a very, very different kind of quality to here in England. Like the county that we live in, Mendocino County, is 3 million acres. Its population is 84,000. The big town of Mendocino is Ukiah, which has 15,000 people. And Berkhamsted barely even gets on the map. That's about 40,000 people. And then Hemel is a completely different town, right? An utterly different universe. And that's all of 5 miles away. Our monastery is considered in the village of Redwood Valley. We're 8 miles from the center of the village. But we're still considered we're in Redwood Valley. So anyway, it's a big area and very thinly populated. 500 people came to Seiji Sugawara's memorial. It's a huge turnout. And many different people, different groups got up and gave speeches about all the wonderful things that he'd done and how he'd helped out and all of his wonderful selfless effort that he'd dedicated himself to. One particular story, the reason why I'm telling this story that was really striking was it was a woman who had founded the Inland Land Preservation Trust for Mendocino County. So it's a coastal county, and she had started this charity to protect open space in the interior. And she said she was sitting down with her husband and Seiji and his wife over supper one night, and she said, just sort of casually mentioned, Seiji, you've really left quite a legacy here in Mendocino County with all of this wonderful. And she was halfway through her sentence, and she said he practically leapt down her throat, and he said, "It's not about leaving a legacy. It's about doing the right thing here and now." And she said, it kind of put a dent in the dinner party for a moment. But it was he was so impassioned about it, because obviously he gained a lot of praise and scored a lot of points, and it was flattering to be thanked and liked and appreciated so much and to do so many good things. And it's very easy for the mind to go to, well, I'd like 500 people to show up at my funeral and say all kinds of nice things about me, come up with a list of good deeds that they read out. That'd be nice. But what was really clear was that he knew that in order to really bring his life to fruition and do what was for the best, it just had to be that simple response in the moment of what's the right thing to do now, regardless of how much one's name is tied to it or what people think of it. It's like that sense of just doing what is needed and letting the world make of it what it will. So that, to me, it was like really striking, because my mind also tends easily to go into, how I will be remembered. And I didn't really realize the extent of that until I had that insight at the memorial. I thought, gee, that's embarrassing. I really think that way a lot, don't I? Oh dear. So I had a reflective few months following that. But it was also very relieving, because I could see, I really carry that around a lot. I really care about how I'm going to be remembered. Whew, what a burden. If I could dump that and leave that alone, then it all gets a lot easier. So this quality of becoming really very easily takes over our meditation practice. Trying to become concentrated, trying to be a good meditator, trying to be doing all the right things, trying to follow all the rules, trying to be a good person. And it's not to poo-poo that or say there's anything wrong with that, but it's to notice what's the experience that is there when the becoming mind grabs hold of those useful principles. To tell another story, this is a bit more personal, was for many years at the beginning of my, and I'm just not sort of particularly obsessed with talking about me, but just it's a kind of obvious example that springs up in my mind. For the first number of years of my monastic life, I became a novice in 1978 when I was 21, and then came back to England to Chithurst, which was newly opened in the end of 1979. And then from then through until about 1986, I was hell-bent, if that was not quite the right word, vigorously intent on becoming the perfect monk. I was sort of obsessed with doing everything absolutely perfectly. So I kept the Vinaya extraordinarily strictly. I always had more raggedy, patched robes than everybody else. I sort of had patches on patches. I still can't quite give up that habit. But I had patches on my patches on my patches. And, I was extraordinarily abstemious. I had sort of the fewest possessions, and I would, sit up after the end of the evening, sitting in Ajahn Sumedho's Dhamma talk, and I'd sit up in the evening later than everybody else, and I'd get up earlier in the morning. And as years went by, I piled on more and more ascetic practices. So I was, only eating the alms food out of my bowl. I was strictly eating one meal a day, and nothing else, and no other breakfast or anything outside of that. And then I even took on the practice of not lying down. So from 1983, when I went up to Harnham Monastery, from 83 to 86, I didn't even lie down to sleep. So, and I kept sort of discovering new things, new practices to be doing. So then Master Hua started becoming a bit of an influence in our community, and many of his books were published. So I started studying Mahayana Buddhism and learning all their mantras. I had all these kind of extra sort of Mahayana practices going on in the background. And then in 1985, I was invited to come and help out here at Amaravati. And it's not only now that it's kind of a big and active place. it was also pretty busy in those days. And so all the way through 1985 and then the winter retreat of 1986, I was sort of carrying around this huge array of ascetic practices and kind of different ways in which I was trying to be the absolute perfect monk, a super monk. No, I mean, I didn't think in those terms, of course, because I was trying to be ever so humble and completely self-effacing into the bargain. I was really into anatta and selflessness and all of that. So I wasn't like a kind of conscious competing, but there was this like an accumulation of all these things that I was doing, and it sort of it kind of reached a peak in the winter retreat of 1986. And I remember there was a night storage heater. It might still be there. It was sort of tucked in the back of the room. It was a night storage heater. It was before we had a regular heating system here. And so I wasn't lying down to sleep, and the place was absolutely freezing. My room in the vihara was, of course, I'd chosen the sort of pokiest, dullest, dingiest room to live in, but that was really freezing. So I had a kind of an affair with the night storage heater. So that winter retreat, the routine was already up at 3 in the morning and finish at 11 at night. It was sort of, Ajahn Sumedho had decided to have a sort of no prisoners taken kind of retreat. Yeah. So up in the everyone was getting up at 3, and then the last sitting was finished at 11 at night. And then I would just stay in here through the night, just leaning up against the night storage heater and carrying on my meditation through most of the night. And so by the time I got to the end, that was the beginning of 86. By the time I got towards the end of that year, I was surprised how haggard that face was that was looking out of the mirror at me, and just sort of how clogged my life seemed to be. Just, I was doing all this stuff, all this kind of great diligent practice, but somehow it was my life was just far from the quality of liberation. There was this great sense of burdenedness and difficulty. And then I remember very vividly chatting with Luang Por just before it was like the December or so before we began the winter retreat in 87, and he was saying, well, last winter retreat, I really cracked the whip, and we were getting up at 3 and staying up till 11, and a bunch of the monks were actually jumping in when the swimming pool wasn't Luang Por's water garden, it was just actually a swimming pool. Some of the monks were breaking it. It was a freezing cold winter, really icy. They were breaking the ice on the pool and jumping in for a dip to get ready for the 3 o'clock sitting. It was pretty extreme kind of era. And so, so you can imagine that was the sort of kind of thing people were doing, and I was trying to be more extreme than that. So Luang Por, in his great wisdom, said, "I didn't really like the energy that we got into last winter. It wasn't really helpful. So I think we'll just sort of calm everything down this year and just kind of try and be ordinary." And I was sort of, well, actually, Luang Por, I think I was feeling that kind of thing myself, and I decided to give up, all of my ascetic practices, this kind of not lying down. And I started going through my list. He said, "Great." And I was expecting him to say, "Oh well, if you really have to, I've been really impressed and inspired with all that you've been doing, but if you really feel it's time to kind of just sort of step off that program for a while, then that's okay." But it wasn't. He just kind of burst out, with obvious delight. Like, "Hooray! At last, you're finally seeing sense." Oh. Well, he didn't actually put it in those words, but that was the feeling that was there. And it was something that he'd actually been saying in many, many Dhamma talks about the way that we can identify with particular practices or identify with doing stuff and think that is the practice, or that is progress, or that is intrinsically good, and not realizing what we're doing. And of course, as I've been hearing him saying that for like several years. Like, yeah, right, that's right, really, that's good, that's true, that's really good. Yeah, some people really get caught in that, don't they? And finally, it clicked, like, duh, that I was one of the chief culprits. And so then, I decided to scratch, and all of the special things that I was doing, and it suddenly came home to me, like how much stuff I was doing, just all these different things, chanting these mantras and doing these recollections and not lying down, and so all of these things that were designed to be liberating, they were just more like, and even though they were skillful means, many of them just encouraged by the Buddha himself, when it's co-opted by the becoming mind, that which is trying to get somewhere or get something, or is trying to be something, be the perfect monk, be the compassionate person, being the helpful one, it just turns into a huge chore. And my experience when I suddenly just left that all aside, it's extraordinary how much space there was in the day. And also it was quite difficult to be ordinary, so it became a special ascetic practice to be normal. I got so used to being special all the time that the task was to be just bhikkhu average. So the trick though is not to feel that we have to ditch all of that. Say, oh yeah, I'm too busy becoming a perfect meditator. Okay, I'll quit the retreat and go home. It's not a matter of, because that's just vibhava tanha. That's just taking the opposite extreme of say, oh, it's the practice that's the problem. It's mindfulness of breathing is the problem. It's walking meditation is the problem. It's all these precepts, the 8 precepts. That's the problem. I'm getting neurotic about treading on some living being that I can't even see. So I should stop keeping the precepts, then I wouldn't worry. That's just vibhava tanha. That's not going to solve the issue either. Really, what it is, it's just that recognizing the self-creating element, that which is sort of identifying with a particular practice, and that the becoming urge, and just loosening that, just dropping back a notch, so that we're still doing the ordinary things: walking meditation, sitting meditation, following the precepts, acting in a harmonious way, cultivating kindness and selflessness and so forth. But just that, without that extra tension of me trying to get something, me trying to get rid of something, just making the right moves and allowing the system to carry itself. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's like, I often liken it to when you have overdrive in a car. When a car has a gearbox with overdrive. And if I understand how this works, it's when you are going at high speed, when you go into overdrive, you're going at the same speed but with less revs. It's just that, just dropping back a notch, so that the system is being carried at a good momentum, but there's just free of that racingness, that getting somewhere-ness. So this is a very helpful skill for us to cultivate. And when we do, and this kind of practice I was talking about earlier today, like with the walking meditation, learning how just to let the body walk without you going anywhere. You notice when we're able to even touch on that quality of stillness, or witnessing the body as a perception, a collection of changing perceptions in the mind. That when we're able to discern that underlying stillness along with the flow of perceptions, then there's that recognition that there's nobody going anywhere. There's just perceptions of the body changing, coming, going, changing. And so that using these simple exercises, or with the breath, or other simple, tangible aspects, we begin to tap into that cessation of becoming, like that, no longer caught in that urge. When I was in 1983, I was just about to set off on a long Tudong walk through England. I'd been at Chithurst Monastery for about 4 years, and myself and Nick Scott, a layman who probably many of you, anyone who's visited Chithurst in recent years, or some of you are very familiar with him, large, red-bearded, kind of vibrant being. So Nick and I were going to set off on this long-distance walk through England, about 800 miles or so. And I vividly remember being in the what's now the sitting room at Chithurst, the shrine room. It was a meditation space, but it was like the morning meeting. This was the day that Nick and I were going to set off, heading towards Noy's house. So we were going. And I remember vividly Ajahn Sumedho saying, actually there's nobody going anywhere. There are just conditions of mind that are changing. So that burned itself into my... Actually there's nobody going anywhere. There are just conditions of mind that are changing. And it wasn't that he's saying, Amaro, you stay here. You're not going anywhere. He was saying, Amaro, you're not going anywhere. Let the walk happen. But actually, you're not going anywhere. You understand? So that there's that feeling of me as a person going from here to there. That seems so matter of fact, so ordinary. You know, I've come from America, and you've come from Portugal, or you come from Italy, or from Berkhamsted, and now you're here. Now we are here in the shrine room. So it seems obvious, But that's if we're identified with the body and with the personality, with three-dimensional space. When we actually shift the perspective to the view of Dhamma, it's all just conditions of mind that are changing, right? Form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness, coming, going, changing. So one moment there's a perception of Portugal, next moment there's a perception of Amaravati. Just like, I open my eyes and there's, all of us people. I close my eyes, nobody. Open my eyes, oh, here we are again. It happens here. So it's that recollection of that. So the cessation of becoming is not, you're not going anywhere, Amaro, you stay here. It's not like cessation of becoming sometimes. I mean, and this is how I did think of it at first. When I heard that kind of phrase, I thought, that sounds like crashing into driving your car into a brick wall. I'm going somewhere, then crash, I'm stopping. But the cessation of becoming is not the kind of the forced ending of a condition. It's a recognition of that dimension of our being which is not caught into that flow. Does that make sense? It's not a part, it's not entangled, it's intrinsically unentangled, like the mirror is not entangled or stuck on the image that reflects in it. Now the force of becoming is extremely compelling, isn't it? It's and it seems so obvious, so matter of fact. Of course, of course I came from Berkhamsted, and here I am. Here we all are. It's matter of fact, and the conditioning is extraordinarily powerful, isn't it? And then now with spring, this kind of great English springtime, of lushness of this is a sort of becoming central. This is a sort of epitome of becoming. Like that Yeats's poem "Sailing to Byzantium," where he says, "That is no country for old men, the young in one another's arms, birds in the trees, salmon falls and mackerel crowded seas, all fish, flesh, fowl, commend all summer long whatever is begotten, born and dies. Caught in that sensual music, all neglect, monuments of unaging intellect. Caught in that sensual music, all neglect, monuments of unaging intellect. It's a wonderful image of this kind of the flush of spring and growth and development. All fish, flesh, fowl commend all summer long whatever is begotten, born and dies. Kind of the great abundance of spring, all these beautiful trees bursting into blossom and its gorgeous kind of fragrances. As you walk down the little ramp there's something that just hits you with this blast of perfume as you go by. Now, it's not to say that spring is evil. That all those blossoms are out there to trick you and ensnare you in Mara's net. And they're just blossoming. It's just the universe doing its thing. But it's just as Yeats was pointing out, like caught in that sensual music, what happens is neglect. I mean, he uses this phrase, monuments of unaging intellect, which might sound a little bit off-putting. But if instead we retranslate that or render that as the fundamental spiritual qualities of our nature, that's what we miss, that in a way the ground of reality, the unconditioned, because of the entrancing, beautiful, intoxicating quality of the conditioned. And this is, spring is the uprising. This is the sort of most bedazzling, entrancing, compelling season of all in the cycle of the year. And it's supposed to be. That's why it's spring. It's when things are mating and being born. All of the young in one another's arms. And it's supposed to be compelling. It's not that there's anything wrong, but it's if we let the heart get caught in that and get carried away with that, then we find that we can't really enjoy it. It's a strange thing, isn't it? If we're swept up in that, if we're trying to keep it, have you ever found that feeling when I remember Ajahn Sumedho coming back from a trip to Switzerland one time, when he'd been there in the spring, and he said, I got tired with all the beauty. Driving around these places, seeing one gorgeous, intoxicating, wonderful landscape after another. So I was exhausted. The mind wants to keep hold of it. In Japanese, and then anyone who speaks Japanese will correct me if I got the pronunciation wrong, but they have a word, it's actually transliterated the same as aware, but it's pronounced aware. And it literally means the painfulness of beauty. So when we meet with something that's extraordinarily beautiful, there's a painfulness because of I want to keep it, or how can I hold it? Oh, it's slipping away. And that it's in a way that when something is extraordinarily beautiful or delightful, wonderful, there's this peculiar painfulness that comes with it because we can't keep it. It kind of slips through our fingers. And that what we find, and it's not that I'm sort of encouraging the letting go of becoming as a sort of undercover sensualist, kind of hedonistic program. But what you find is that when you learn to recognize that becoming tendency, and we learn to let go of it, we find that we're actually much more able to be with the beautiful, with the qualities of nature, and to fully delight in them, but without that the painfulness, without the heart being caught and carried away, without that sort of barb that of being the heart swept away by that. I was told actually by some friends in the Zen tradition that in Japan they have the cherry blossom has such a sort of profound and emotionally laden place in Japanese culture that it's forbidden to plant cherry trees in monasteries. They're too exciting. And I'm told seriously, There is apparently only one cherry tree in a monastery in Japan. That's in Harada Roshi's temple. So he's considered to be such a supremely unwavering kind of someone whose practice is so supremely well developed that he can cope with having a cherry tree in his monastery, and the effect that it has on all his disciples. Come the spring, that he can keep the ship on course. Now you might think, well, cherry trees are easy, you know. We have other obsessions that we get carried away with. But one of the things I found most wonderful and beautiful, and one of the greatest gifts of Buddhist practice, is the effect that has when we really recognize the habit of becoming, and we train the heart not to get caught in that. Then we find ourselves far more able to genuinely delight. Sometimes it can seem like you're trying to give up on the whole of the sense world, or it's some kind of a Buddha Dhamma is a sort of downer on the world of the senses. But actually, it's rather like the story of the Buddha, where Ananda makes some comment. This is a story Ajahn told. I've never been able to track it down in the scriptures. And Luang Por Chah was famous for coming up with quotations that it's kind of hard to find exactly which sutta they came from. But I did hear this story where he said Ananda and the Buddha are having their meal together, and Ananda makes some comment about how this kind of sumptuous food has been offered by one of the local monarchs, and how the Tathagata, the Buddha, is so supremely detached that even eating such sort of fine and delicious food like this would all of it would just be as a single unified taste. It would have no impact. It would be as if the Tathagata is just drinking plain water. So deep and profound and complete is the Tathagata's detachment. And of course, the Buddha, as he does in all of these exchanges, says, "Not so, Ananda." Not so, Ananda. Indeed, the Tathagata is supremely detached, but far from his sense of taste rendering food as sumptuous and as delicious as this, as being tasteless, or as of a single kind of unvaried quality. Rather, the sense of taste in the Tathagata is supremely acute. And then he takes some food out of his bowl and then gives it to Ananda and says, "Eat this, Ananda, and you will taste things as the Tathagata tastes them." And so Ananda takes this mouthful of food, and there's this huge explosion of this massive taste bomb goes off. And Ananda is completely knocked over by this extraordinary kind of depth and deliciousness and intensity of and variety of flavors and all sorts of different dimensions that taste never even knew existed. And then the Buddha says, and even with the Tathagata's sense of detachment, it is this is the way the Tathagata tastes the food, and yet still there is complete detachment from it. Indeed, it's because of the Tathagata's utter detachment that he is enabled to taste all the dimensions that there are, all these qualities of that there are inherent in the food. So Ananda, do not think that detachment neutralizes the sense world. Rather, it is that quality which removes all obstruction and all confusion about the nature of the sense world. The Tathagata knows the arising, the cessation, the origin, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape with respect to all of the six senses. Nanda goes, yes. So these are a few reflections on the nature of becoming, and an encouragement to realize the cessation of becoming, bhava nirodha. And hopefully during these coming days, this is things that we can explore and cultivate more completely for ourselves. everyone.